My dad thinks I'm his best friend, his little doll, and the only reason he's still breathing. But right now, I'm sitting in my bedroom with a hidden folder on my phone filled with voice recordings and photos of my own scars, building a case to get him out of my life forever. How do you look at the man who buys you every designer dress you ask for and realize he's the same person who pushed you so close to the edge that you almost didn't make it to your 14th birthday? In less than 48 hours, I'm walking into a therapist's office to read him a letter that will either set me free or shatter my world into a million pieces. And the terrifying part isn't just the confrontation. It's the fact that I'm using his own money to fund the very life I'm about to walk away from. They say you don't realize you're drowning when the water is warm. And for the first 11 years of my life, the water was tropical. My parents divorced when I was only 3, so I don't really have memories of them together. I don't remember the shouting matches or the moment the house split in two. I just remember the 2 different worlds I had to inhabit. In one world, there was my mom. She's a teacher, the kind of person who gives everything she has to her students and her daughter, even when the bank account is screaming at her to stop. We live comfortably, sure, but there's a ceiling to what she can provide. In the other world, there was my dad. My dad is a medical salesman. He's charismatic, successful, and he carries himself with the kind of confidence that makes people think he's untouchable. He isn't private jet rich, but he's buy whatever you want whenever you want it rich. Growing up, I was his shadow. He'd take me on shopping sprees, buy me the latest gadgets, and tell me over and over again how I was the only person who truly understood him. He called me his best friend. At 7, 8, 9 years old, that feels amazing. You feel special. You feel like you've been chosen for an elite club of 2. But as I got older, I started to notice that the membership fee for this club was becoming more than I could afford to pay. The manipulation didn't start with a bang. It started with whispers. He would buy me a dress my mom couldn't afford, and then spend the ride home talking about how unfortunate it was that mom didn't prioritize her finances better. He would take me to an expensive dinner and spend the entire time sighing about how lonely he was, how he had nobody else in the world but me, and how if I ever left him, he'd have no reason to keep going. I was a child, and I was being handed the responsibility of a grown man's entire psychological well-being. I was his anchor, but the anchor was being dragged to the bottom of the ocean. By the time I was 11, the weight of it started to crush me. I realized that the gifts weren't gifts, they were chains. Every time he bought me something, it was like he was adding another brick to a wall he was building between me and my mom. He wanted me to hate her. He wanted me to see her as the boring parent, the poor parent, the one who didn't love me enough to spoil me. And it worked for a while, which is the part that makes me feel like a monster today. I remember being younger and looking at my mom with this misplaced resentment, not realizing she was the one actually holding my life together, while my dad was busy buying my loyalty. The stress of living this double life, of being a perfect, smiling doll for a man who made my skin crawl with guilt, eventually broke me. I started sinking into a darkness I didn't have words for yet. I was a straight-A student. I had friends. I had the clothes. I had the life every girl at school envied. But inside, I was looking for an exit strategy. There were nights where the pressure of being his only reason for living felt so heavy that I genuinely thought the only way to stop the noise was to stop everything. I came so close, more times than I want to admit. I ended up in therapy because my school caught wind of my suicidal ideations, and suddenly, the secret I'd been keeping from my dad became a medical emergency. The problem with being 14 in the US is that the laws are a bit of a maze. But there's this age, 13, where you start to get a say in your own treatment. My mom was my rock during this. She's the one who pushed for therapy, the one who sat in the waiting room with tears in her eyes, while I talked to a stranger about things I couldn't tell her yet. My dad, on the other hand, had no idea why I was there. I couldn't tell him. How do you tell the person paying the therapist's bill that they are the reason you're in the chair? He finally agreed to it only because the school made it an issue. But even then, he treated it like a phase, like I was just being a dramatic teenage girl. He doesn't see the voice recordings on my phone. He doesn't see the logs I keep of every time he guilt trips me, or every time he uses his money to try and twist my perspective. To him, I'm still that little girl he can mold. But I'm not. I'm 14 now, and I'm tired. I'm tired of the doll treatment. I'm tired of the emotional hostage taking. This year is supposed to be my quinceañera. It's the thing I've been looking forward to since I was a toddler. I want the big gown, the music, the celebration with the people I actually love. And here's the ugly truth that makes me feel like the villain. He's the one paying for it. My mom is a teacher. She can't drop thousands of dollars on a single night, no matter how much she wants to. My dad can. And because he's a medical salesman who loves to show off, he's going all out. But I know him. I know that if I stand up to him, if I tell him the truth about how his love has actually been a slow-acting poison, he will pull the plug. He doesn't handle confrontation. He doesn't do, "I'm sorry." He does, "You're dead to me." He's cut off everyone in his life who has ever dared to point out his flaws. He's a bridge burner, and I'm standing on the bridge he's currently building for my party. So I've made a choice. My therapist and I have been working on a plan. We're calling it a family session, but it's actually an intervention. My mom will be there, my therapist will be there, and I will be there, reading a letter that lays it all out. Every manipulation, every "if you leave me, I'll die," every moment he made me feel like an object instead of a daughter. I'm terrified. I'm terrified he'll cut me off financially, sure, but I'm more terrified of the other things. I'm terrified he might actually hurt himself like he always threatened. I'm terrified he might finally snap and the emotional abuse will turn physical. And sometimes, in the darkest part of the night, I'm terrified that I'm the crazy one. What if he's just a normal, disciplinary dad, and I've convinced everyone, including my therapist, that he's a monster? But then I look at the evidence I've collected. I listen to the recordings. I see the way I've had to learn to survive him, and I know I'm not crazy. I'm just a girl who's done being a doll. The thing about being a medical salesman is that you're trained to be a chameleon. You walk into a room, you read the person across from you, and you become exactly who they need you to be to close the deal. My dad is a master at it. To his clients, he's the reliable, high-achieving professional. To his friends, he's the generous guy who always picks up the tab. But to me, he was a different kind of salesman. He was selling me a version of reality where he was the hero, and everyone else, especially my mom, was the villain. And for a long time, I was his most loyal customer. I remember sitting in the back of his luxury SUV when I was maybe 8 or 9. The leather seats were pristine, and the air conditioning always felt a little too cold. He'd just picked me up from my mom's house, and the routine was always the same. He'd look at my clothes, maybe a slightly faded t-shirt or a pair of sneakers that had seen better days, and he'd give this little theatrical sigh. He wouldn't say anything mean directly. He'd just say, "Don't worry, princess. We'll go to the mall. We'll get you something that actually fits who you are. I know things are tight over there." Tight. That was his favorite word for my mom's life. He made her sound like she was failing, even though she was a dedicated teacher working 40+ hours a week to make sure I had a roof over my head and food in my stomach. At his house, there were always new gadgets, the latest video games, and a fridge stocked with everything I could ever want. At my mom's, we had what we needed, but we had to be careful. My dad used that gap like a weapon. He didn't just want me to enjoy the things he bought. He wanted those things to be the proof that he loved me more than she did. He was buying my loyalty, one designer hoodie at a time. As I hit my preteen years, the doll treatment shifted from being about clothes to being about my entire identity. He started calling me his best friend, but looking back, that's such a heavy thing to say to a child. A best friend is an equal. A best friend is someone you can lean on. I wasn't his equal. I was his emotional support animal. He'd sit me down and vent for hours about his work stress, his failed relationships, and how cruel the world was to him. And then came the hook, the terrifying, sharp hook that kept me from ever swimming away. "You're the only reason I'm still here, you know that?" he'd say, his eyes getting all watery. "If I didn't have you, I don't think I'd have any reason to wake up in the morning. You're my purpose. Without you, I'm nothing." Imagine being 12 years old and being told that if you ever stop being perfect, if you ever decide you want to spend more time with your mom or your friends, your father might actually end his life. It's a level of pressure that most adults can't handle, and it absolutely shattered me. I felt like I was walking on a tightrope over a canyon every single day. If I made a mistake, if I pushed back against his control, I wasn't just being a teenager. I was potentially killing him. That's not love. That's a hostage situation. That's when the darkness really started to move in. I couldn't breathe. I felt like I was being swallowed by his needs. I started to resent my mom, just like he wanted, because I blamed her for leaving him and putting me in this position. I felt guilty for being expensive, guilty for existing, and guilty for secretly wanting to run away from the man who supposedly loved me more than anything. I started pulling away from everyone. My grades stayed up because I was terrified of what he'd do if I failed. But inside, I was checking out. I didn't want to be anyone's only reason for living. I just wanted to be a kid. When the school stepped in and I started therapy, it was like someone finally turned on a light in a room where I'd been stumbling around in the dark for years. At first, I was terrified to speak. I thought the therapist was just another person I had to perform for. But slowly, she started asking the right questions. She didn't ask, "What's wrong with you?" She asked, "What's happening to you?" And for the first time, I realized that the way my dad treated me wasn't normal. It wasn't just how he is. It was emotional abuse. But knowing it and stopping it are two very different things, especially when there's a quinceañera on the horizon. In Hispanic culture, the quince is everything. It's the transition from childhood to womanhood, the big debut. For years, my dad and I talked about it. He promised me the world. He told me he wanted me to have the biggest dress, the best venue, the kind of party that would make everyone in town jealous. And as much as I hate to admit it, a part of me wanted that too. I'm a 14-year-old girl. I want to feel beautiful. I want to celebrate with my friends. But as the planning started, I realized that the party wasn't for me. It was for him. Every choice we made had to go through his filter. The dress? It had to be the one he liked. The guest list? He wanted to invite his business associates to show off his perfect daughter. It was like he was producing a movie, and I was just the lead actress he'd hired. And the worst part? He was paying for every cent of it. My mom, being the amazing person she is, tried to help where she could, but she knew she couldn't compete with his checkbook. She stayed in the background, supporting me emotionally, while my dad used the party as the ultimate leash. "You know, this party is costing me a fortune," he'd say casually while we were looking at catering menus. "But it's worth it because you're my girl. I'd do anything for you. I just hope you realize how much I sacrifice for your happiness." It was a constant reminder. I bought this for you. You owe me. I felt like a hypocrite. Every time I went to a fitting for my gown, I felt like a fraud. How could I let him spend thousands of dollars on a party for me while I was simultaneously recording our conversations on my phone? How could I smile for the father-daughter dance rehearsals when I was planning to go to court to take away his custody? The guilt was eating me alive. I'd look at the dress, this beautiful, shimmering thing, and see it as a shroud. There were nights when I'd sit in my room at his house, looking at the voice memos on my phone, and I'd convince myself that I was the one who was crazy. I'd think, he's just a dad who loves his daughter. He's just intense. Lots of parents say things they don't mean when they're stressed. I'd think about the money he spent, the gifts he bought, and I'd feel like the most ungrateful child in the world. Maybe I was a manipulative little brat, just like he'd implied during some of his darker moods. But then I'd play back a recording. I'd hear his voice, not the charming salesman voice, but the low, cold, shaking voice he used when I didn't give him the attention he wanted. I'd hear him telling a 13-year-old girl that if she went to her mom's for the weekend, he'd probably just drive his car into a bridge. I'd hear the way he devalued my mom, calling her names and laughing at her struggles. And I'd remember why I started recording in the first place. I wasn't the crazy one. I was just the only one who saw him without the mask. The plan for the joint therapy session started as a tiny seed of an idea between me and my therapist. She told me that I had a right to be heard in a safe environment. She told me that I didn't have to keep being his doll. But the closer we get to the date, the more the fear paralyzes me. I keep thinking about what happens the moment I finish reading that letter. Does he explode? Does he walk out and never look back? Or does he do the one thing I'm most afraid of? Does he look me in the eye and tell me that I've broken him beyond repair? I've been practicing reading it in front of the mirror. My hands shake every time. In the letter, I don't hold back. I talk about the suicidal thoughts he caused. I talk about the way his gifts feel like bribes. I talk about how I don't feel safe around him because his love feels like a trap. I'm about to set off a bomb in the middle of our lives, and I'm the one holding the detonator. But even as the fear threatens to choke me, I'm also collecting my evidence. I've looked up the laws in my state. I know that emotional abuse is hard to prove, but I have the recordings. I have the messages. I have the history of my own self-harm that stemmed from his manipulation. I am ready to fight for my life, even if it means losing the party, the dresses, and the father I thought I had. The transition between my mom's house and my dad's house always felt like crossing an international border between two countries that were at war, but only one of them knew it. Every Sunday night, when my dad's black SUV would pull into my mom's driveway, a cold, familiar knot would tighten in my stomach. I'd look at my mom, sitting there on the porch, her face a mixture of worry and forced bravery, and I'd feel this overwhelming urge to just lock the door and hide under my bed. But I couldn't. Because if I didn't go, the phone calls would start. The "why don't you love me" texts. The "I guess I'm just a bank account to you" messages. So I'd grab my bag, plaster on my doll smile, and walk toward the car. Living at my mom's was quiet. It was real. We cook dinner together, talk about my day at school, and watch movies on a couch that had a slight sag in the middle. There were no hidden agendas. But at my dad's, everything was a performance. His house was beautiful, all glass and stone and high-end finishes, but it felt more like a showroom than a home. And the most expensive item on display was me. I spent hours in that house over the last year, just sitting in my room, staring at my phone. That's where the vault lived. It's a hidden app disguised as a calculator where I keep everything. There are dozens of voice memos. I started recording them after a particularly bad night when I was 12. He'd cornered me in the kitchen because I'd spent too much time texting my mom that afternoon. He didn't scream. He never really screamed. He just used this low, vibrating tone that made me feel like I was shrinking. "I do everything for you," he'd said in that recording. "I work myself to the bone so you can have the life your mother couldn't give you in 100 years. And how do you repay me? By running back to her the second you get the chance? It's pathetic. You're better than that. You're mine." Listening back to those recordings is the only thing that keeps me sane when I start to doubt myself. It's so easy to fall back into his trap. He'll walk into my room with a shopping bag from my favorite store, toss it on the bed and say, "Found this and thought it would look perfect on you for the party. You're going to be the most beautiful girl in the city." And in that moment, he looks so kind. He looks like the great dad everyone else sees. My brain starts to do this frantic dance, trying to reconcile the man who gives me everything with the man who tells me he'll kill himself if I ever stop being his best friend. I call it the Quinceañera fog. It's this cloud of guilt that follows me everywhere. My dad has already spent thousands on the deposit for the venue. The dress, my dream dress, is sitting at a boutique downtown, half paid for. It's this massive, ethereal gown with intricate beadwork that makes me feel like a literal princess. But every time I think about it, I see the price tag, and then I see his face. It's not just a dress. It's a $2,500 down payment on my soul. I've had these dark, intrusive thoughts about what would happen if I just stopped. If I just canceled the party, told him I didn't want the money, and stayed at my mom's forever. But then the fear kicks in. He's a medical salesman. He's a professional at closing deals and overcoming objections. If I tried to just walk away, he wouldn't let me go quietly. He'd hunt me down emotionally. He'd make my life, and my mom's life, a living hell through the court system. He has the money for the best lawyers. My mom has a teacher's salary and a heart of gold. It's not a fair fight. That's why the therapy session is so important. It's the safe zone. My therapist, Sarah, explained it to me like this. In this room, the power dynamic changes. He isn't the provider, and you aren't the child. You are two people in a mediated space where the truth is the only currency. But Sarah doesn't know my dad like I do. She hasn't seen the way he can twist a conversation until you're the one apologizing for something he did to you. I spent last night writing the letter. I went through 3 different notebooks because I kept tearing out the pages. I'd write something like, "You make me feel like I'm suffocating." And then I'd think, no, that's too mean. He'll get upset and then he'll talk about the bridge again. I'd try to soften it, but then I'd remember the scars on my arms from the nights when the pressure was too much to bear. I'd remember the suicidal ideations that weren't just phases, but actual plans I'd made because I didn't see any other way out of his house. I finally settled on a version that is raw and honest. It starts with the divorce. It talks about how I felt like I was being used as a pawn for 11 years. It details the specific ways he's manipulated my relationship with my mom. And then it gets to the hardest part. The part where I tell him that I don't want to be his doll anymore. I tell him that if he wants a relationship with me, it can't be bought. It has to be earned through respect and boundaries. The quinceañera is the elephant in the room. In the letter, I tell him that I love the party and I'm grateful for it. But if the price of that party is my mental health, then I don't want it. I'm prepared to lose it all. The dress, the music, the celebration. I've told my mom this, and she just held me and cried. She told me she'd do whatever it takes to make it up to me, even if we just have a small dinner at home with my closest friends. She's willing to sacrifice, but the guilt of letting her take on that burden is almost as bad as the guilt of taking my dad's money. I'm also terrified of his physical reaction. He's never hit me, not once. But there's a look he gets, this darkening of his eyes, a tightening of his jaw, that makes every survival instinct in my body scream, run. When he's confronted with something he can't control, he gets cold. And sometimes, cold is scarier than hot. What if he tries to stop me from leaving the therapist's office? What if he follows us home? I've already put 911 on my speed dial. I've told my therapist that I need a safety plan for after the session. And then there's the suicide threat. This is his ultimate weapon. He's told me multiple times that I'm the only thing keeping him on this earth. If I read this letter, if I betray him by telling the truth in front of my mom and a stranger, will he actually do it? My therapist says I'm not responsible for his choices. She says that using suicide as a way to control someone is one of the highest forms of emotional abuse. I know that in my head, but my heart still feels like a little girl who doesn't want her daddy to die, even if he is the person who made me want to die first. I have the evidence folder ready. I have the letter tucked into my backpack. I have my mom's hand to hold. Tomorrow is the day. It's the day I find out if I'm finally going to be a person or if I'm going to be his little doll forever. I keep looking at my phone, at the countdown I made for the quinceañera. It used to be a countdown to the happiest day of my life. Now, it feels like a countdown to a collision. I'm 14 years old, and I'm about to go to war with the person who claims to love me most. And the worst part? I'm still wearing the jewelry he bought me while I plan my escape. The morning of the session felt like a funeral for a person who was still standing right in front of me. I woke up at my mom's house, and for a split second, I forgot. I reached for my phone to check the time, and then I saw the date on the lock screen. This was it. The day the doll was going to speak back to the puppet master. My mom was already in the kitchen. She didn't say much. She just pushed a plate of eggs toward me, but I couldn't eat. My stomach felt like it was full of jagged glass. She kept looking at me with this expression, half pride, half pure, unadulterated terror. She knew what was at stake. She knew that if this went wrong, her life would get a lot harder too. My dad has a way of making everyone around him pay for his unhappiness, and my mom had already spent years paying that debt. "You don't have to do this if you're not ready," she whispered, her hand resting on mine. "We can just keep going. We'll find another way." But I looked at her, and I looked at the faded paint on our kitchen walls, and I thought about the $2,500 dress sitting in a boutique across town that was essentially a bribe to keep me silent. I thought about the recordings in my Vault app. I thought about the nights I spent crying until my eyes were swollen shut because I felt like I was responsible for a grown man's survival. "I have to," I said. "If I don't do it now, I'll never do it. I'll just keep being his best friend until I disappear." The car ride to the therapist's office was silent. I kept my backpack clutched to my chest like a shield. Inside was the letter. 6 pages of handwritten truth. Every time we hit a red light, I'd look out the window at the people walking their dogs or getting coffee, and I felt like I was on a different planet. They were living normal lives. They were worrying about the weather or their jobs. I was 14 years old, and I was heading into a room to tell my father that his love was a cage. When we pulled into the parking lot, his car was already there. A sleek, black, late-model SUV, parked perfectly straight. Seeing it made my heart hammer against my ribs so hard, I thought it might actually break something. That car represented everything I was supposed to be grateful for. It represented the medical salesman who was always on, always selling, always closing. We walked into the waiting room, and there he was. He looked normal. That's the thing that always trips me up. He didn't look like a villain. He was wearing a nice polo shirt, his hair was perfectly styled, and he was scrolling through his phone with a relaxed look on his face. When he saw me, his entire face lit up. That great dad smile that makes everyone else think I'm the luckiest girl in the world. "Hey, princess," he said, standing up to give me a hug. I let him hug me, but I felt like I was made of stone. He smelled like expensive cologne and success. He didn't even acknowledge my mom, who was standing 2 feet away. To him, she was just the unfortunate obstacle between him and his daughter. "Ready for our little family talk?" he asked, his voice full of casual confidence. He honestly thought this was just going to be a session where we talked about communication, or maybe some teenage rebellion stuff. He had no idea he was walking into an ambush of truth. Sarah, my therapist, opened the door and beckoned us in. Her office was small, filled with soft lighting and those calming posters of mountains and forests. There were 3 chairs arranged in a semicircle. My dad took the middle one, naturally. He wanted to be the center of the room. My mom sat on my left, and I sat on my right, with Sarah facing us. The silence in that room was heavy. It felt like the air had been sucked out. Sarah started with the usual therapist talk, setting the ground rules, explaining that this was a safe space, emphasizing that we were here to listen to one another. My dad was nodding along, looking like the model of a supportive parent. He even reached over and patted my knee. "I just want what's best for her," he told Sarah, his voice dripping with sincerity. "I know things have been a little tense lately, teenage years and all, but she's my world. I'd do anything for this girl." I felt a surge of nausea. I looked at Sarah, and she gave me a small, encouraging nod. This was the moment. I reached into my backpack and pulled out the letter. I could feel my dad's eyes on me, puzzled at first, then narrowing slightly as he realized I wasn't just there to talk. "Dad?" I started, my voice shaking so badly I could barely hear myself. "I wrote something, and I need you to listen to the whole thing before you say anything. Please." His smile didn't disappear, but it changed. It became that tight, professional mask he wears when a client is being difficult. "A letter. Okay, princess. If that's how you want to do it, I'm all ears." I took a deep breath. I looked down at the paper. The words were blurred at first, but then they snapped into focus. "Dear Dad," I began. "For a long time, I thought that being your best friend was a privilege. I thought the gifts and the clothes and the money were signs of how much you loved me. But I realize now that they were actually a way to keep me quiet. They were a way to make me feel like I owed you my life because you spent so much money on it." I heard him shift in his chair. The room went cold. "Since I was little, you've told me that Mom didn't love me as much as you did because she couldn't buy me the things you could. You made me feel like our house was a poor house and that I was expensive. You used your money to build a wall between me and the person who was actually taking care of my heart." I didn't look up, but I could hear his breathing change. It was getting heavier, more rhythmic. "And then there's the way you talk to me when we're alone," I continued, my voice gaining a little bit of strength. "You tell me that I'm the only reason you're still alive. You tell me that if I leave you, you'll have no purpose. Do you have any idea what that does to a 13-year-old girl? To feel like her father's life is a burden she has to carry every single day? It didn't make me love you more. It made me want to die so I wouldn't have to carry it anymore." At the mention of wanting to die, my mom let out a small, muffled sob. My dad, however, was silent. I finally looked up from the page, and the look on his face was one I'll never forget. It wasn't sadness. It wasn't regret. It was pure, freezing fury. He wasn't looking at me like a daughter. He was looking at me like a deal that had just gone south. "Is that what you think?" he said, his voice low and dangerous. "After everything I've given you? After the thousands of dollars I've spent on your quinceañera? After the life I've provided? You're going to sit here in front of these people and tell me I'm a monster?" "I'm telling you the truth," I said, my heart pounding in my ears. "And the party? If the party is just another way for you to control me, then I don't want it. You can take the dress back. You can cancel the venue. I'd rather have a birthday at a park with people who don't hold their love over my head like a debt." The explosion didn't happen right away. He just stood up. He didn't look at Sarah. He didn't look at my mom. He looked straight at me, and for the first time in my life, I saw the man behind the mask. He looked old, and he looked mean. "Fine," he said, his voice trembling with rage. "You want to be independent? You want to see what life is like without the manipulation of my money? You got it. Consider the party canceled. Consider the doll broken. Since I'm such a burden on your life, I'll get out of it. Let's see how long you last on a teacher's salary." He turned toward the door, but then he stopped. He looked back at me, his eyes gleaming with a sick kind of satisfaction. "And if anything happens to me tonight, if I decide I really don't have a reason to be here anymore, just remember this moment. Remember that you're the one who pushed the button." He slammed the door so hard, the pictures on the therapist's wall rattled. The silence that followed was deafening. I sat there, clutching my letter, staring at the closed door. My mom was already across the room, pulling me into her arms, but I felt numb. He'd done it. He'd used the ultimate weapon. He'd walked out, canceled my dream, and left me with a death threat hanging over my head. But then I felt something else. A tiny, flickering spark in my chest. For the first time in 11 years, I wasn't the one apologizing. I wasn't the one trying to fix him. I had said the words. I reached into my pocket and felt my phone. I hadn't just read the letter. I had been recording the entire session. "Sarah," I whispered, looking at my therapist who was pale and visibly shaken. "I have it. I have him saying it. The threat. The quince. Everything." The silence that follows a door slamming that hard isn't just quiet. It's a physical weight. It's the kind of silence that rings in your ears, louder than the noise that came before it. I sat in that small therapist's office, my fingers still gripping the edges of my 6-page letter, and I felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. Sarah, my therapist, was frozen for a second, her professional mask slipping just enough for me to see the genuine shock in her eyes. My mom was already out of her chair, her arms wrapped around me so tight I could barely breathe. But for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I needed to pull away. "Is he going to do it?" I whispered into my mom's shoulder. My voice sounded small, like it belonged to the 8-year-old version of me who used to hide in the closet when the tension got too high. "Is he really going to, you know?" Sarah took a deep breath and leaned forward, her voice calm but firm. "What you just witnessed, what we all just witnessed, was a textbook example of emotional coercion. He didn't express a desire to end his life because he's in pain. He used it as a weapon to make sure you feel responsible for his survival. That is not love, and it is not your burden to carry." But logic doesn't always win against 14 years of conditioning. Even as Sarah talked, my mind was racing through the what-ifs. What if he drove straight to that bridge he always talked about? What if the police knocked on our door tonight to tell me it was my fault? The doll inside me wanted to run after him, to apologize, to tell him I didn't mean it, to say I'd wear the dress and dance the dance and be whatever he wanted, just as long as he stayed alive. But the girl who had been recording him, the girl who had the scars in the Vault app, stayed in her seat. "We're going to call in a wellness check," Sarah said, picking up her office phone. "If he is truly in crisis, the professionals will handle it. If he is using this to manipulate you, then there will be a record of it. Either way, you are safe here." Watching Sarah dial the non-emergency line was one of the most surreal moments of my life. My dad, the high-flying medical salesman, the man who prided himself on his reputation and his perfect life, was about to have the police knock on his door because his daughter finally spoke up. A part of me felt a sick sense of satisfaction, but a bigger part of me was mourning. Because I knew, with a bone-deep certainty, that the quinceañera was dead. The dress at the boutique, the one with the beads that caught the light like fallen stars, it was gone. The venue with the grand staircase, gone. The music, the flowers, the cake, everything I'd spent years dreaming about was dissolving like smoke. I felt this hollow, aching grief for the party, and then I felt a wave of shame for even caring about a party when my life was falling apart. Am I that shallow? I wondered. Am I really crying over a dress when my father is a monster? But Sarah saw right through me. "It's okay to be sad about the party," she said after she finished the call. "That wasn't just a party to you. It was a milestone. It's okay to grieve the things you're losing while you're saving yourself. Both things can be true at the same time." We stayed in the office for another hour, creating a safety plan. Sarah told my mom that we needed to be prepared for the fallout. My dad wasn't just going to disappear. He was going to retaliate. He'd already started by pulling the funding for the quince, but the real war would happen in the courtroom. "I have the recording," I said, pulling my phone out. My hands were finally starting to stop shaking. "I recorded the whole session. I have him saying that if he dies, it's my fault. I have him saying he's canceling everything because I spoke up." My mom looked at the phone, and then she looked at me with a mixture of heartbreak and awe. "You've been so brave," she whispered. "I had no idea you were carrying all of this. I'm so sorry I didn't protect you better." "You couldn't," I told her. "He made sure I was too scared to tell you. He made me think you were the one who didn't care." That was the moment the quinceañera fog finally lifted. I realized that the luxury, the money, the expensive life my dad provided was just a gilded cage. He'd spent years telling me my mom couldn't give me what I needed, but as we walked out of that office and into the humid afternoon air, I realized she was the only one who actually had. She had the truth. She had my back. The drive home was different this time. We didn't head toward the upscale neighborhood where my dad lived. We went back to our quiet street, to the house with the saggy couch and the teacher's salary lifestyle. When we pulled into the driveway, I didn't feel the usual knot of anxiety. I felt empty. But it was a clean kind of empty. Like a room that had been cluttered with junk for years and was finally being swept out. That night, I sat on my bed and looked at the countdown on my phone. 62 days until the Quinceañera. I deleted the app. Then, I went into my vault and started organizing the files. I labeled them by date and by theme. Suicide threats, financial manipulation, devaluation of mom. I was building a digital fortress, and for the first time, I felt like I was winning. Around 9 p.m., my mom's phone rang. It was the police. They had performed the wellness check. My dad was home. He was fine. He'd apparently told the officers that his unstable daughter was just trying to cause drama because he disciplined her. He played the part of the concerned, victimized father perfectly. He's already starting his narrative, my mom said, her face pale after she hung up. He's going to tell everyone you're the crazy one. Let him, I said. I felt a coldness settling over me, the kind of coldness you need when you're going into a fight you can't afford to lose. He can say whatever he wants to his friends, but he can't lie to the recordings. He can't lie to Sarah. And he can't lie to me anymore. But as the house went dark and I tried to sleep, the reality of my new life started to sink in. I was 14. I was expensive. My mom's budget was already stretched to the limit. My dad had been my source for clothes, for gifts, for the wants of a teenage girl. Now, that faucet was turned off. I looked at the designer sneakers in my closet, the ones he'd bought me 2 weeks ago, and I felt like I was looking at evidence of a crime. I wondered if my friends would still like me when I couldn't go on the expensive shopping trips anymore. I wondered if I'd be the poor girl at school. And then, I thought about the bridge. Even though the police said he was fine, the fear was still there. What if he was just waiting? What if he wanted to make sure I felt the maximum amount of guilt before he did something? I realized then that this wasn't just about a letter or a therapy session. This was a war of attrition. He was going to try to starve me of the things I loved, the party, the money, the status, until I came crawling back to be his doll again. He was betting on my greed and my fear, but he underestimated one thing. He thought he was the only one who knew how to close a deal. He didn't realize that I'd been watching him my whole life. I knew his moves. I knew his scripts. And I was about to write a new ending to the story he thought he controlled. The first week after the therapy bomb felt like living in a house made of glass while someone was outside throwing stones. Every time my phone buzzed, my heart didn't just skip a beat. It felt like it was trying to claw its way out of my throat. I expected anger. I expected him to show up at the front door screaming. But my dad is a salesman, and he knows that sometimes the best way to close a deal is to make the other person feel like they're the one losing everything. The retaliation started quietly. First, it was the cell phone. I woke up on Tuesday morning to find no service in the top corner of my screen. He'd cut the line. He knew that for a 14-year-old girl, my phone wasn't just a gadget. It was my lifeline to my friends, my music, and my sense of safety. It was a digital blackout, a way to remind me that he owned the air I breathed as long as he was paying for the signal. My mom didn't hesitate. She took me straight to a discount carrier and got me a basic plan on her account. It wasn't the high-speed, unlimited data package I was used to, but as she handed me the new SIM card, she looked me in the eyes. "It's not much," she said, "but it's yours. He can't turn this one off." Then came the war of the belongings. My dad sent a formal text to my mom, not to me, stating that since I no longer wished to be part of his family, I needed to come and collect the rest of my things from his house. But there was a catch. He listed specific items that he claimed were his property because he'd paid for them. The laptop I used for school, the designer bags, and even some of the jewelry he'd given me for my birthdays. He was stripping the doll of her accessories. Standing in his driveway that Saturday to pick up my clothes was one of the hardest things I've ever done. He didn't come outside. He'd left my things in black trash bags on the porch, like I was garbage he was finally throwing out. I saw the curtains twitch in the living room, and I knew he was watching me, waiting for me to break down, waiting for me to run to the door and beg for forgiveness. I didn't. I loaded those trash bags into my mom's old sedan with a face as blank as stone. But when we got back to our house and I started unpacking, I found the voids. My favorite hoodies were missing. The expensive skincare sets were gone. He'd curated the bags to leave me with just enough to survive, but nothing that made me feel like me. And then there was the quinceañera. The news spread through my friend group like wildfire. At school, people would come up to me with these pitying looks. "I heard about the party," they'd say. "I'm so sorry. Your dad must be devastated." That was the narrative he was spinning. The heartbroken father who had been betrayed by his ungrateful daughter. I found out he'd actually called the boutique where my dress was and told them I had changed my mind and to put the gown back on the floor. The dress. That beautiful beaded gown I'd spent hours dreaming about. It was gone. Sold to someone else, probably. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw it. Not as a dress, but as a ghost of the life I thought I wanted. The emotional toll was starting to manifest in ways I couldn't hide. I stopped sleeping. I'd stay up until 3 a.m., my ears straining for the sound of a car in the driveway. I kept thinking about his threat, that if he died, it was my fault. I started checking his social media from a fake account just to see if he was posting. He was. He was posting photos of himself at high-end restaurants, looking happy and free, with captions about cutting out the toxicity and starting over. It was a psychological masterclass. He was showing me that he didn't need me, while simultaneously making sure I felt every single second of the struggle without him. "He's trying to starve you out," my mom told me one night as we sat at the kitchen table, looking over our new, much tighter budget. "He wants you to realize that life with me is hard, so you'll come back to the easy life with him. But honey, that easy life had a price. That was costing you your soul." She was right, but being right didn't pay for the clothes I needed for the changing season. It didn't pay for the hobbies I'd had to drop. I felt like I was shrinking. I felt expensive in the worst way possible, like I was a burden on my mom's already heavy shoulders. I started skipping lunch at school to save the $5 she gave me, tucking it into a jar under my bed. I was 14 and I was already preparing for a famine. But in the middle of all this darkness, something incredible started to happen. Without the quinceañera fog, I started to see my mom for who she really was. I saw her staying up late to grade papers, her eyes red from exhaustion, just so she could save up enough to take me to a movie on the weekend. I saw her patience when I'd have a panic attack over a missing sweater. I realized that for 11 years, she hadn't been the poor parent, she'd been the rich one. She was rich in things my dad couldn't even define. Integrity, resilience, and a love that didn't come with a receipt. That's when I decided to fight back. Not with words, but with the evidence I'd been gathering. I spent hours with my therapist, Sarah, going through the recordings. We sat in her office, the same office where the explosion happened, and we listened to his voice. We heard him say, "If anything happens to me tonight, remember that you're the one who pushed the button." "This is it," Sarah said, her voice quiet. "This is the proof of the psychological harm. He isn't just a strict dad. He's a man who uses the threat of self-harm to keep a child in a state of constant terror. We started talking about the legal side. In my state, a 14-year-old's voice carries weight in custody hearings. I told Sarah I wanted to go back to court. I wanted a formal order that protected me from his visitation rights, which had become nothing more than weekend-long kidnapping sessions where I was held emotionally hostage. I began transcribing the recordings. Every best friend comment that felt like a chain, every "your mom is a failure" whisper, every time he used money to buy my silence. I was building a case, not just for a judge, but for myself. I needed to see it all written down so I would stop believing the lies he'd told me. But the biggest test was yet to come. My dad, realizing that the silent treatment and the financial starvation weren't bringing me back to his porch, changed tactics. He sent a package to my mom's house. It wasn't trash bags this time. It was a single, small box from a high-end jewelry store. Inside was a gold bracelet with the charm of a small porcelain doll and a note. "I'm sorry we had a misunderstanding. I've missed my best friend. The dress is back at the shop waiting for you. The party's back on. All you have to do is come home for the weekend and we can put this therapy nonsense behind us. I can't do this without you, princess. Don't let me down again." My hand shook as I held that note. The doll charm felt like it was burning a hole in my palm. The dress, the party, the easy life. It was all right there, just a car ride away. I looked at my mom, who was watching me from the doorway, her face unreadable. She didn't tell me what to do. She didn't tell me I couldn't go. She just waited. I looked at the gold bracelet, and then I looked at the jar under my bed filled with $5 bills. I thought about the bridge, the recordings, and the girl who had almost committed because she couldn't breathe in that luxury SUV. "Mom," I said, my voice finally sounding like it belonged to a 14-year-old woman, not a doll. "Do we have any heavy-duty envelopes? I need to mail something back." The war wasn't over. In fact, it was just getting started. But for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of being expensive, because I'd finally realized that I was priceless. The act of putting that gold bracelet back into its velvet box felt like clicking a pair of handcuffs. Only this time, I wasn't the one being locked up. I was the one handing back the key to my own cage. We went to the post office the next morning. My mom didn't say a word as I filled out the return to sender slip. I didn't even write a letter this time. I didn't need to. The empty box, the return bribe, and the silence were the loudest things I could possibly send him. When the clerk took the package and tossed it into the bin, I felt a physical shift in my chest. It was like a weight I'd been carrying since I was 3 years old. A weight I thought was just the way life is, finally slid off my shoulders. But I knew the peace wouldn't last. In the world of medical sales, when a client rejects a pitch, you don't just walk away. You pivot. You push harder. You find a different angle to exploit. And my dad? He was the best in the business. 48 hours later, the pivot arrived. It wasn't a gift this time. It wasn't a best friend text. It was a formal legal notice delivered to my mom's front door. He was suing for full custody. He wasn't just trying to bribe me anymore. He was trying to take me. His argument, outlined in cold, clinical legalese, was that my mom was unstable and financially incapable of providing for a teenager with complex emotional needs. He used my therapy, the very thing I needed because of him, as evidence that my mom was failing as a parent. He claimed she was alienating me from him, filling my head with delusions, and that my recent outburst in the therapist's office was proof that I was in a toxic environment at her house. I sat on the floor of our living room, surrounded by the papers, and I started to laugh. It was a high, jagged sound that quickly turned into a sob. The sheer, calculated cruelty of it was breathtaking. He was using the very scars he gave me to try and cut me away from the only person who actually loved me. "He's not going to win," my mom said, her voice shaking but her eyes like flint. He has the money, but he doesn't have the truth. We have Sarah. We have the school reports. And we have you. We have more than that, I whispered, reaching for my phone. We have the vault. I spent the next 3 days in a fever dream of transcription. I sat at my mom's small kitchen table, headphones on, listening to hundreds of hours of my own life. It was a grueling, agonizing process. I had to hear him call my mom a loser teacher who would never amount to anything. I had to hear him whisper that I was the only thing keeping him from the bridge. I had to hear the sound of my own voice, younger, smaller, desperate to please, saying, "I love you too, Dad," while I was shaking with fear. The most damning recording was from 6 months ago. We were in his SUV, driving back from a dress fitting. I'd mentioned that I wanted to invite a few more of my mom's family members to the quince. His voice in the recording was like a serrated knife. "You want them there? Why? So they can see how much better your life is with me? They're parasites, princess, just like your mother. If you keep pushing for them, maybe I'll just cancel the whole thing. Maybe I'll just leave you with her and see how many designer dresses she buys you when the rent is due. You're mine. I bought this life for you. Don't you ever forget that." Listening to it now, without the quinceañera fog clouding my judgment, I realized he had told me exactly who he was a long time ago. I just hadn't been ready to hear it. I also went through my old vents, the digital journals I'd kept on the nights I'd considered ending it all. I found entries from when I was 11, 12, 13, descriptions of the pit in my stomach, the way my hands would shake before his weekend visits, the photos of the scratches on my arms that I'd hidden under long sleeves, even in the summer. It was a mountain of evidence. But as I organized it, that old, familiar voice in the back of my head started whispering again. "Are you sure you're not the crazy one? Maybe he was just parenting. Maybe he was just stressed. You're destroying his life. If he goes to court and loses everything, and then he goes to that bridge, it will be because of these files." I stopped typing, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. The guilt was a living thing, a shadow that he'd planted in my heart a decade ago, and it was still growing. I looked at the vault and felt like a traitor. I called Sarah. I didn't wait for my next appointment. I needed to know if I was a monster. "Guilt is the final tool of the abuser," Sarah told me over the phone. "He spent years making you believe that his emotions are your responsibility. They aren't. If a man chooses to use his daughter as a shield against his own demons, that is a failure of fatherhood, not a failure of the child. You aren't destroying his life, honey. You're finally describing it." That word, describing, changed everything for me. I wasn't attacking him. I was just telling the truth about what had happened. If the truth destroyed him, then the truth was simply doing its job. The news about the custody battle leaked into my school life, too. It turns out my dad had been confiding in some of the other parents, the ones with daughters in my grade. He was playing the role of the grieving father whose daughter had been brainwashed by a bitter ex-wife. I started getting weird looks in the hallway. Some of my friends, the ones who only cared about the quinceañera and the pool parties at his house, stopped sitting with me at lunch. "I heard your dad is really depressed," one girl told me, her voice dripping with fake concern. "He said you're not even talking to him. Don't you think that's a little cold after everything he's done for you?" I looked at her, and for the first time, I didn't feel the need to explain. I didn't feel the need to defend myself. "You only know the version of him he sells you," I said quietly. I'm the one who had to live with the real thing. But the biggest blow came when I found out that the quinceañera gown, my gown, had been featured on the boutique's Instagram page. Someone else had bought it. A girl from a neighboring town was posing in it, her face glowing with the kind of uncomplicated happiness I'd thought I would have. I stared at the photo for a long time. The beadwork, the lace, the shimmering skirt. It was beautiful. But as I looked at it, I realized I didn't want it anymore. That dress was tailored for a doll. It was designed for a girl who was supposed to stand still, look pretty, and make her father look like a king. I wasn't that girl anymore. "Mom?" I said that evening, walking into the kitchen where she was looking over legal documents. "I don't want a quinceañera, not even a small one." She looked up, surprised. "Are you sure? You've wanted this for years." "I don't want a debut," I told her. "I don't want to come out as a woman in a world where I'm still being treated like property. I want an Independence Day. On my birthday, I want to go to the courthouse. I want to hand over these files. And then, I want to go get a burger with you and my real friends. No gowns, no dances. Just me." My mom stood up and hugged me, and this time, I felt the strength in her arms. We were expensive because we were fighting for our lives, and the cost was high. But we were going to pay it together. But my dad wasn't finished. He had one more card to play, and it was the darkest one in his deck. The final card in my father's deck wasn't a legal motion, and it wasn't a bribe. It was a suicide note. It came on a Tuesday night, exactly 3 days before our first court appearance. I was sitting on the floor of my room, trying to focus on my geometry homework, when my phone vibrated. It was a text from him. The first one in weeks. My heart did that familiar, sickening drop, but as I read the words, the world seemed to tilt on its axis. "I can't do this anymore, Princess. I've lost my best friend, I've lost my purpose, and now your mother is trying to take what's left of my dignity in court. I want you to know that I loved you more than life itself. Everything I did for you. Please don't hate me for what I'm about to do. I'll be waiting for you at the bridge. Goodbye, my little doll." I stopped breathing. The paper in my hand crinkled as my grip tightened. Every nightmare I'd had since I was 11 years old was coming true. The bridge, the threat, the ultimate guilt. My brain screamed at me to run, to call him, to tell him I'd drop the case, I'd come home, I'd be his best friend forever if he just stayed alive. I felt the doll inside me waking up, ready to perform, ready to save him at the cost of myself. I stumbled into the hallway, tears already blurring my vision. "Mom!" I screamed. "Mom, he's doing it! He's at the bridge!" My mom came running out of the kitchen, her face pale. She grabbed the phone and read the text. For a second, I saw the same terror in her eyes. But then she took a deep breath. She looked at me, really looked at me, and I saw her resolve harden. "We aren't calling him," she said, her voice shaking but steady. "What? Mom, he's going to die. It'll be my fault." I was hysterical now, the years of conditioning taking over. I felt like I was back in that luxury SUV, suffocating under the weight of his love. "No," she said, grabbing my shoulders. "We are calling the police. Again. If he is in crisis, they will find him. If he is lying, they will find him. But you are not going to be his savior tonight. That is over." Watching her dial 911 was the most excruciating 3 minutes of my life. I paced the living room, pulling at my hair, waiting for the sound of a gunshot or a splash in the distance. I felt like a murderer. I felt like the most expensive girl in the world. A girl whose freedom was costing a man his life. The police dispatcher took the information. They sent a car to his house and a patrol to the bridge. We sat on the couch, the clock on the wall ticking like a countdown. 5 minutes. 10. 20. Every second felt like a year. I kept looking at the Vault app on my phone, wondering if those recordings were worth a human life. And then the phone rang. It wasn't my dad. It was the police sergeant. "Ma'am," the officer said to my mom, his voice audible in the quiet room. "We've located the individual. He was at his residence. He appears to be in no physical distress. He was sitting on his patio having a drink. He told our officers that the text was metaphorical and that he was just trying to express his grief to his daughter." A metaphorical suicide note. I sat back on the couch, and for the first time in my life, the fear didn't turn into relief. It turned into a cold, hard, crystalline rage. He hadn't been at the bridge. He hadn't even been in his car. He was at home, sipping a drink, waiting for me to call him sobbing so he could close the deal. He was testing the leash. He wanted to see if the doll would still jump when he pulled the string of his own death. "Did you get that in writing, officer?" my mom asked, her voice like ice. "The statement about it being metaphorical?" "Yes, ma'am. It's in the official report for the wellness check." That was the turning point. The suicide threat, his most powerful weapon, had been fired, and it was a blank. The day of the court hearing arrived. I didn't wear a quinceañera gown. I wore a simple dark blue dress that my mom had bought me on sale. I didn't have a professional hairstylist or a makeup artist. I just tied my hair back and looked at myself in the mirror. I looked older. I looked tired. But I didn't look like a doll. The courtroom was intimidating, all dark wood and high ceilings and the heavy smell of old paper. My dad was there with his lawyer, a man in a suit that probably cost more than my mom's car. My dad looked the part of the grieving father perfectly. He had dark circles under his eyes, probably makeup, and he kept looking at me with this expression of wounded betrayal. His lawyer stood up and started the pitch. He talked about my dad's substantial resources. He talked about the lifestyle I was used to. He talked about how my mom was poisoning me against a man who only wanted to give me the world. He even brought up the metaphorical text, claiming it was a cry for help from a father who was being emotionally lynched by his own family. Then it was our turn. My mom's lawyer didn't give a long speech. She just handed the judge a USB drive. "Your Honor," she said, "we would like to submit the contents of the vault. These are recordings made by the child over the course of 3 years. They aren't metaphorical. They are a record of systemic emotional abuse and psychological manipulation." The judge, a woman with gray hair and eyes that looked like they'd seen everything, put on her glasses. She started playing the files. The courtroom went silent. The only sound was my dad's voice filling the room. Not the great dad voice, but the cold, vibrating tone of the salesman who didn't like the terms of the contract. "You're the only reason I'm still here. If you go to your mom's, I'll drive into a bridge. I bought this life for you. You're mine." I watched my dad as the recordings played. For the first time, the mask slipped in public. He didn't look sad. He looked cornered. He started whispering to his lawyer, his face turning a blotchy, angry red. He looked at me, and for a split second, I saw the great dad try to come back. He gave me a tiny, pleading smile. But I didn't smile back. I just watched the judge. When the recording of the family therapy session played, the part where he told me to remember that I was the one who pushed the button if he died, the judge stopped the audio. She looked at my father over the rim of her glasses. "Mr. she said, her voice very quiet. "Do you believe it is the responsibility of a 14-year-old girl to prevent her father's suicide?" I was emotional, Your Honor," he stammered. "I love her beyond—" "Love," the judge interrupted, "does not require a hostage. It does not require a ledger of expenses, and it certainly does not require the psychological terrorization of a child." The ruling wasn't just a win. It was a total demolition of the cage. My mom was granted sole physical and legal custody. My dad's visitation was suspended indefinitely, pending a full psychological evaluation and a year of supervised, court-mandated counseling. He was ordered to continue providing child support, but he was barred from contacting me directly. No texts, no calls, no metaphorical notes. As we walked out of the courthouse, my dad was standing by his SUV. He looked smaller than I remembered. He didn't have the salesman aura anymore. He just looked like a man who had finally run out of people to trick. "You'll regret this," he hissed as I walked past him. "You'll see what it's like to be nobody. You'll be just like her." I stopped. I looked at the man who had owned my life for 14 years. I looked at the expensive car and the expensive suit. And then I looked at my mom, who was waiting for me by her old sedan. Her hand reached out, her face glowing with a peace I'd never seen before. "I hope so," I said, "because nobody feels a lot better than being your doll." We didn't have a big party that night. We went to a local diner, the kind with neon lights and sticky menus. My two best friends were there, and we sat in a big booth and ate burgers and shakes. There was no grand staircase, no designer gown, and no father-daughter dance. But as I sat there, laughing until my sides ached, I realized something. I wasn't expensive anymore. I was free. And freedom is the only thing in the world that you can't put a price tag on. Looking back, I realized that my dad was right about one thing. I was his best friend, but only because he didn't allow me to be anything else. He didn't want a daughter. He wanted a mirror that only showed him the version of himself he liked. Breaking that mirror was the hardest thing I've ever done, but it's the only reason I'm still here to tell this story. If you're watching this and you feel like you're living in a gilded cage, if someone tells you that their life is your responsibility, or that their love has a price tag, please know that you aren't crazy. You aren't a doll. You are a person, and you deserve to breathe without asking for permission. What would you have done in my shoes? Would you have stayed for the quinceañera, or would you have walked away from the money to find your voice? Let me know in the comments. Your stories and support mean everything. And if you want to hear more stories about finding the strength to stand up for yourself, don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell. My name is just a name now, not a brand. And for the first time in my life, I can't wait to see what happens next.